Gabriel Aissa to include me in this conference at my hometown, Washington, D.C. And our Foreign Minister, Gibran Bassil, made a huge difference when he brought LDE to life for the Lebanese diaspora from all over the world. He gave us right to vote for the first time. Let's move for the first panel, Lebanon-U.S. Political Relations and Advocacy panel. The moderator of this panel would be the Honorable Ambassador Ed Gabriel. Please. Our first panelist, the Honorable Ray LaHoud, former U.S. Secretary of Transportation, former Congressman. The Honorable Nick Rahal, former Congressman. And Dr. Paul Salem, President of the Middle East Institute. And Mr. Bilal Saab, Senior Fellow and Director of the Defense and Security Program at the Middle East Institute. More information about our panelists, they're all from Lebanese descent, with our moderator, Ambassador Ed Gabriel.
Thank you to the Foreign Ministry and to Ambassador Aissa for asking us to put together this panel today. This panel on U.S. political and advocacy, which we hope to involve more of the Lebanese diaspora to be a part of. I'd like to thank our colleagues at the American Task Force for Lebanon, Leslie Touma and Jean Abinader in particular, for their help in working with today's panel. As you know, the ATFL, even the people in the back of the room probably know this, but they're really, they've got other issues, I think, going on right now. But as you know, the ATFL has been active for more than 30 years, working with the Lebanese government and with Congress and the administrations to enhance the importance of a strong U.S. bilateral relationship. We've assembled here today well-known experts that understand the U.S.-Lebanon relations. They'll provide you with their views on issues affecting the relationship, its importance, its challenges, and how we, the Lebanese American community, can make a difference. Let me introduce today's panelists. To my left, my far left, is Paul Salem. Paul is becoming known as Mr. U.S. Lebanon, having created one of the most important think tanks in Lebanon before moving to the United States. He's now head of the Middle East Institute, which has become one of the most influential policy centers in America on U.S. Middle East issues. Bilal Saab is to my left, is a well-known military analyst on the Middle East and the U.S. Mr. Saab recently joined the MEI after serving as senior advisor for security cooperation in the Pentagon's Office of the Secretary for Defense Policy, with responsibilities for the U.S. Central Command. Now, the two gentlemen to my right don't need introductions, but they're going to get them. To my immediate right is Congressman Nick Rahal, our most well-known Lebanese American member of Congress, having served in the U.S. House of Representatives for 38 years. During that time, he was the staunchest supporter of U.S.-Lebanon relations and was involved in some of the most important U.S. laws affecting the Middle East region. And finally, and most importantly, we're honored to have with us Secretary Ray LaHoud, one of our most decorated and highest-ranking Lebanese Americans to serve in government. Most recently as Treasury Secretary, maybe he should have been Treasury Secretary, but he was Transportation Secretary under President Obama. Ray served most of his life in public service, including being in the U.S. House of Representatives for 15 years. We're going to first begin with a presentation by Paul on the importance of the U.S.-Lebanon relationship, including how the present political, economic, and security relationship with Lebanon affects our bilateral relationship. Paul?
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Minister Bassil, fellow ministers from Lebanon, members of the Lebanese Parliament, our various ambassadors to the U.S. and to the UN, members of the U.S. administration and Congress. Great to be here today. A few opening remarks. I'm going to talk about 9 sort of themes that tie Lebanon and the U.S. together. 4 are a bit historical, 5 are more current, but they're all relevant to the nature of the relationship. One is the presence of a lot of Lebanese who are Americans, as was mentioned in the previous panel, at least 500,000, maybe another 500,000 of Lebanese descent. Maybe that's not a large number in a country of 300 million, but these are all generally very successful, very influential, very visible people. So Lebanon is part of America, and that's a very important thing to keep in mind. Secondly, the U.S. has very long historical educational ties with Lebanon dating back to the 19th century. American University of Beirut, Lebanese American University. The cultural and educational ties are of long standing with big institutions here in the United States. Thirdly, throughout the 20th century, Lebanon has been a democratic, a liberal, and open society, similar in that sense to the United States. So there's a shared cultural space, shared values, and that I think is of quite importance. Fourthly, Lebanon has always been a free market liberal economy, particularly during the Cold War. That was very, very important, something it shares as an economic vision with the United States. Those are 4 long-standing, deep ties between the two nations. To come to more recent times, I'm going to mention 5. One is the growing military ties between the two militaries, the U.S. military and the Lebanese military, which my colleague Bilal Saab certainly can tell us much more about. This started seriously in the 80s and has continued up to this very day and is a very important and structural relationship. Very recently, Lebanon has been a very effective partner with the U.S. in the war on terror, defeating ISIS and Al-Qaeda areas, particularly in the northern Beqa, and that was proof to the U.S., proof to the U.S. military that dollar for dollar, man for man, the Lebanese military is one of the most effective in the region, and that's something that the U.S. still values tremendously. A third point in the more contemporary is that the Lebanese-Israeli border has been generally stable and calm for the last 13 years. Of course, there's tensions, there's uncertainty, but overall, the Lebanese army has played an important role there, and that's something that the United States values quite importantly. Fourthly, Lebanon currently hosts more than 1 million, 1.5 million Syrian refugees. Of course, we know that's a big issue in Lebanon. As the minister said, that's something we are grappling with. But certainly the U.S. recognizes that as a big financial supporter of that difficult challenge that Lebanon faces, is very grateful for the role so far Lebanon has played and in managing this enormous refugee crisis that has already impacted Lebanon, impacted Europe. For the United States, that is a very important issue. Fifth, that I think the United States values that Lebanon maintains an inclusive, pluralistic society where Christians and Muslims, Sunnis and Shi'is, peoples of all communities can live peacefully together, while 2 hours east, 2 hours north, there is and has been massive loss of life and genocide and so on, and this is really a historic value and historic achievement for Lebanon. I think the U.S. also values very much that Lebanon has maintained stability, has maintained its viability despite very serious refugee burdens, security crises, economic pressures, and political, and has not collapsed or failed, neither imploded nor exploded like some other countries, whether next door in Syria or Yemen or Iraq or Libya. And the survival and stability of Lebanon is something that the United States administration still values very much. Of course, there are tensions in this relationship, which is only natural. The United States is a global power. It has many interests around the world, certainly has many interests in the Middle East, and sometimes that creates tensions with Lebanon and Lebanese politics. This is nothing new. The U.S. had tensions with Lebanese opposition back in the 1950s and Arab nationalism, which was aligned with the Egyptian President Nasser, had backing from the Soviet Union. The U.S. grappled with that tension, maintained relations with Lebanon, but it was an issue of tension. Again, in the 1970s, the US grappled with the presence of a strong and armed PLO, and a movement also aligned at the time somewhat with some of the Arab countries in the Soviet Union. So in the context of the Cold War, there have always were tensions. Today, we are in a different type of tension, particularly with this administration, which is pursuing a maximum pressure campaign against Iran, and that's one of its biggest sort of pushes in the Middle East in the last 2 years. And of course, that impacts Lebanon because it manifests as pressure on the government and pressure on the army to reduce or contain the role of Hezbollah. It also obviously involves direct sanctions from the US on Hezbollah or Hezbollah officials, and possibly people close to or cooperating with. This is an issue of great concern for Lebanon and for the Lebanese. It's something that this administration, both members of the administration and a lot of members of Congress, are quite focused on, and it is a point that needs to be managed very carefully, partly because of the political and security implications it might have, but also the implications on the Lebanese economy and the Lebanese banking sector. So there is tension within US policy making towards Lebanon. I would say generally there are two tendencies. One tendency is to prioritize the stability of Lebanon and to put as a secondary point the issue of Iran and Iran's friends in Lebanon and partners, but always prioritizing, not raising the pressure to such a degree that it would destabilize Lebanon. I would say some people in the administration and Congress have that view, but I would warn that there's some in the administration and Congress who do not hold that view, who prioritize going after Iran and Iran's friends all over the region, Lebanon and elsewhere, without much concern for Lebanon's stability. That tension exists. It's a dangerous one for Lebanon. It's something that all of us, all of you, are sure aware of and need to manage. I would say up till today, thanks probably to the preferences of President Trump himself, of Secretary Mike Pompeo, of the successive secretaries of defense, and some of the members of Congress, we've still maintained that priority for Lebanon's stability, but the pressure certainly is getting higher. The relations are always improved by visits by Lebanese officials, like the foreign minister, like Prime Minister Hariri's visit, like the head of the army and others. These are all very important visits to keep the ties alive between the Lebanese officials and government, as well as business and community leaders, and the United States government and Congress in the United States. Lebanon certainly could do more to enhance its own resilience and stability in this period of stress and tension, by improving governance, by improving economic reforms and going forward more boldly and combating corruption. These are things that are noted and noticed in the United States as well as around the world. This would certainly help liberate some of the money that was pledged in Sedr and could give Lebanon some much needed cushion because it certainly is facing a large number of pressures. We certainly face at a larger scale, a large-scale risk in terms of the possibility of a sudden escalation of conflict between Iran and other players in the region. We saw just last week one of the biggest attacks on oil production in the 80-year history of US-Saudi relations. We don't know what this will lead to, but the situation in the region is looking that it's going towards escalation. It is extremely important that we maintain our distance from the wars of others. As the original civil war was called, this certainly would be a war of other states and other powers. It is very dangerous for us as well. We must do our best to make sure we are not dragged into such a war, but the risk is extremely, extremely high. I would end by saying it's our mission to strengthen Lebanese state institutions, Lebanese sovereignty. Second, to improve governance and reduce corruption. Thirdly, to continue the work on maintaining and strengthening these historic and currently strong Lebanese-American ties. And finally, making sure that Lebanon does not get dragged into the war, another war of other players and other states on our own much battered land. Thank you, and thanks, Ed, for having me.
I'd like now to turn to Bilal to discuss the security and stability issues affecting Lebanon and the importance of its relationship to the United States, as well as the role of UNIFIL in Lebanon. Please, Bilal.
Your Excellency, Mr. Basir, Basil, Ambassador Isa, Ambassador Mudallali. Thank you for the invitation. It's really good to be here, especially in the company of old friends. There's a good bit of overlap between what Paul just talked about and what I'm about to say, but I guess I'll strictly limit it to the issues that you mentioned, Ed. Lebanon has been, for quite some time, one of the largest recipients of Title X security cooperation funds from the Department of Defense, not just in the Middle East, but in the entire world. Think about that for a moment. A world that contains very important NATO allies and countries that are 20 times, 30 times, 40 times the size of Lebanon. That's pretty impressive. Why? Because you mentioned Central Command. CENTCOM has viewed the Lebanese Armed Forces, or the LAF, as a top partner in the Middle East, but also around the world. And the leadership of the organization believes that the investment they have made over the years in the LAF has generated a pretty significant return. Unlike most other partners the United States works with in the region, the Lebanese follow, and these are pure facts, there is no bias in this, the Lebanese follow US training to the teeth. They listen very carefully to US advice, and they very much understand that the best way to build a fighting force and to build military capability is to not just invest in hardware and equipment, but also in what I'm going to call the software. That means the institutions that you need to protect the country. Don't get me wrong, equipment is very important, and the United States provides a good bit of that to the LAF, including some pretty sophisticated stuff, whether it's the Bradleys, whether it's the Humvees, the light attack helicopters, the planes, the Super Tucanos, the communications equipment, the precision artillery, the ammunition, you name it, the UAVs, a lot of that. And of course, this is no secret, this is open source information. The United States has special operations forces stationed in Lebanon to train some elite Lebanese military forces in the LAF. There's also the annual military exercise, Resolute Response, that the United States does with the LAF, and that also includes the US Army, the US Coast Guard, and the US Navy. US Ambassador Elizabeth Richard stated just June of last year that the United States has trained more than 32,000 US officers just recently, and a lot of those officers come to the United States also to take part in the incredibly important program that the United States State Department runs, which is called IMET. Now, all of this assistance has paid off, okay? Any serious observer would agree with that. Just remember that 2007, when we had the episode of Nahr al-Barid, the Lebanese military pretty much felt compelled to almost destroy the entire camp in order to defeat a pretty smallish ragtag militia. And 10 years later, the Lebanese army launches Operation Dawn of the Outskirts, and it's a smashing tactical success. Night and day, the progress that was witnessed over just a decade. And if you compare that kind of performance to many of the other partners that the United States works with, it is really unique. But it's not just DoD money that Lebanon receives from the United States. It's also Title 22 money from the State Department. That sum has been on the decrease lately. That's not just because of Lebanon, it's because this administration has had different ideas about foreign aid, and so that budget has been decreasing for a number of other partners and allies of the United States around the world. According to the FY19 congressional budget justification for foreign operations, so 80 million of that foreign military financing goes to Lebanon. And to sum it all up, since '06, the United States has provided more than 1.7 to $1.8 billion to the Lebanese army. That is not a small sum. Paul has mentioned why the United States gives all that money to Lebanon, what the US interest is in Lebanon, so I'll just add one comment about that is strictly related to the military issue. All of that money obviously helps the left to implement some pretty important United Nations Security Council resolutions, whether it's 1559, 1680, and 1701. Now, of course, none of that means that everything is rosy and dandy in the relationship, or even with the assistance to the left, obviously a number of challenges and concerns on the part of Washington, and there's no secret that the biggest of all is the very complicated relationship between the United States and Hezbollah, and of course the issue of the arms of Hezbollah. That's a conversation for later, and I've written a good bit about it, but certainly that's something that needs to be emphasized. I sympathize with the words of Prime Minister Hariri and many others in the Lebanese government when they say that this is an issue that is not really purely Lebanese. This is a regional, heck, even an international issue. I think there's a lot of truth in that. But beyond the issue of assistance to the left and its military capabilities, obviously there's a very critical need, you mentioned the issue of UNIFIL, very critical need for a dialogue that should continue between the Lebanese military and the Israeli military in Naura, of course with the sponsorship of UNIFIL. That's been going on for quite some time. I think it's pretty important to continue with that to address the issue of borders, which is quite significant and a good bit of progress lately on both the maritime end and on the land border. David Satterfield, as you all very well know, has been shuttling between Beirut and Washington to make progress on this. Now it's David Schenker, our colleague from before at the Washington Institute. He's taken over that role now, and I think that the United States is very much committed to this mediation effort. A number of issues still to be hashed out, whether it's the issue of the Hezbollah tunnels, whether it's the issue of the border wall that the Israelis are building, where are they building it, where's the blue line on that issue. A lot of that's still to be discussed. But I want to emphasize this, and I'll end with this. Even though it's roughly small piece of territory at sea, which 330 square kilometers, I cannot overstate how critical that piece of territory is to the future relationship between the two countries, and also to stability in that part of the world, to diffusing tensions, to reducing the risk of accidents. And I think the two parties have every interest in really resolving this issue. And I think the Lebanese government's stance is quite reasonable, that it's really smart to put the two issues in the same basket, the land border and the maritime border. And I suspect that there's no vehement objection on the part of the Israelis to do that. The renewal of the UNIFIL mandate is very much welcome news. That was a concern, quite frankly. But I think thanks to some pretty crucial US role, that is now a reality. I'll stop here so I don't take more of my time, and thank you for listening.
Very good, thank you, Bilal. Fresh off the press, I got an email from our government relations person, Jay Gazelle, who I think is here today. Last night a report came in for Lebanon. They're going to get ESF. Well, right now it's marked as it goes through the process of ESF monies, 115 million, FMF 105 million, INCLE monies 10 million, anti-terrorism 11 million, IMET training 3 million, for a total of $250 million this year for Lebanon. And I want to underscore what Bilal said. That's for a country of 4.5 million people. They've got to be close to the top 5 recipients of foreign military aid in the world by the United States. And last year received $822 million from the United States total, when you include refugee aid and other forms of aid, which puts it in the top 10 recipients of countries that America gives money to. So Lebanon is important. And the reason for this panel today is to really engage the Lebanese American community, the diaspora, to let you know what we're doing in Washington and to try to encourage you to join with us in this effort. So you've heard now a little bit about the policy background involving the political and security issues and economic issues. We're going to now turn to Congressman Rahal and Secretary LaHood because we want to talk about what it takes to get politically involved and make a difference. They're going to discuss the importance of the Lebanese community and educating Congress and the American administration. I think they are. They're going to do what they want to do usually, but the need for Lebanese to provide consistent messaging, the Lebanese American community to provide consistent messaging and concrete policy ideas, and in general, how best to interact with a congressional member of Congress that may be representing your district. So I'm going to start with Nick, if you don't mind, and get his thoughts on things.
Thank you, Ed. First, to Your Excellency, Minister Gibran Bassil, Ambassador Isa, Ambassador Mudali, very nice to have you, and I certainly commend each of you for your works in your respective positions. I agree with the panelists that have spoken thus far, even our moderator, Ambassador Gabriel.
He speaks with a very similar accent to our earlier speaker, Judge I forget his last name, Buhakik. So you'll notice a little bit of a similarity in accent.
That's because my grandfathers are from southern Lebanon. Let me say in the very outset that Lebanon is not and should not be a political issue in America. Lebanon has friends across the political aisles. Yet it is incumbent upon every American of Lebanese descent, every American that cares about America's best interests in the region, and incumbent upon the Lebanese themselves to get involved in our political processes. Whether it's Democrat, Republican, Independent, I don't care what you want to call your affiliation. But you cannot ignore what is happening in Washington, D.C. and in the Congress of the United States, in the bureaucracy of our U.S. government, and certainly not at the executive level. You have to be involved in every one of those levels. Certainly the American Task Force for Lebanon recognizes that, and they've done tremendous work and tremendous progress over their history. And I salute ATFL and those that support ATFL financially or through volunteer or in whatever manner, because that is where it's at. The ATFL recognizes all three of these levels in which Lebanese Americans, Lebanese, and friends of Lebanon should be involved. Through CODELs, through staff DELs, through NOTELs, or whatever you want to call them. The ATFL recognizes it's important to get, whether you're a member of Congress or an important player in the American economic scene or a local level influential individual. ATFL recognizes it's important to get to these people and to make them recognize the importance of Lebanon to America's best interests in the Middle East, to dispel a lot of the misperceptions that exist about Lebanon across American society, and to get these individuals to Lebanon to see firsthand the people, their warmth, their persistence, their dedication, the government leaders, and certainly the relationship of Lebanon to America's best interests in the Middle East. It takes money, yes, and ATFL has to raise that money, I recognize that. But it can be done and it should be done so that these policymakers, problem solvers, decision makers, bureaucrats at the whatever level, State Department, Pentagon, they know that the American people care about Lebanon, and you ought to thank individuals in these respective levels when they do something that helps Lebanon, because a note of thanks can go a long way to future help. So I just want to conclude on that and commend each of you for being here, participating in LDE. This is an important forum, whether it's held here or in any other city, USA, or in Beirut itself, where I've attended the LDE in the past. Keep up your activism. Thank you.
Before we open up questioning, of course, we want to hear from Ray as well. Thank you.
Let me first of all say to the minister, thank you for holding this meeting in the United States. The amount of money that Ed just announced is thanks in part to the visits that you and other ministers have made over a long period of time, giving credibility to our government from your government. But having this meeting here and having all of these people gathered here to be able to meet you and to personally interact with you, to meet the ambassador, to meet the UN ambassador from Lebanon to the United States, this is absolutely critical. These relationships are so important to Lebanon really putting the kind of face that Lebanon wants to put in the United States. So congratulations, Minister, for doing that. Thank you. And to all of you that are gathered here, thank you for coming. I don't know if you came here to meet the minister or meet the ambassador or just to find out, or really just to find out what's really happening in the country. But I want to emphasize this, and I don't want to, the idea, the commitment from the United States to Lebanon is exactly what Ed Gabriel just said. It's carried out through the involvement of the Congress, providing the money to the priorities that the minister and the ambassador and the UN ambassador have said to the members of Congress. That's the importance of that money. It's a big chunk of money, but the importance of it is it's in areas where, whether it's the Prime Minister when he's been here, or the President when he goes to New York and meets with President Trump and says to President Trump, thank you for supporting Lebanon in the way that you have. Not just with money, but also with support too. And so I can't overemphasize to all of you the importance of you being here, but also going back home and talking to your own, everybody in this room that came from LA or Buffalo or Peoria or wherever you came from has a congressman. And if your priority is Lebanon, then you need to let your congressman know that and why it's important, and that you were in Washington and you met with the minister, and that you met with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, you met the ambassador from the UN, and you talked to them, but more importantly, you listened to them about the importance of Lebanon on the world stage and the importance of having a great relationship with and between our two countries. You have now got to be, the fact that you're here, you signed up to be a part of the minister's team, to be a part of the ambassador's team, to promote Lebanon, and to make sure Lebanon's not left behind, and to make sure that Lebanon is on the radar of your own congressman. And you also each have 2 senators, and hopefully it's more difficult to interact with them. It's not difficult to interact with your own representative. Get to know them, so that when they see you, they know what is number 1 on your agenda, Lebanon, and how to improve the quality of life. That's it, Ed.
Wow, a great ending to a great panel. Before we open up questions, let me raise 2 points that Ray reminds me of. One is our community has come together just recently in the past year to do political fundraising for the House of Representatives and our Senate. I'm pleased to tell you that the community, by coming together, has raised nearly $300,000 for candidates in the last year. And we're beginning to create a buzz about our ethnic community caring about what happens to Lebanon from American citizens. So that's so important. The second thing we should mention is we're taking our next CODEL, which is, ATFL is sponsoring it, so it's officially a non-official congressional delegation to Lebanon next week with 3 congressional members and their spouses. And we're going to really up that ante. We're going to do more staff delegations and more congressional delegations, and eventually look at the next generation of leaders in our country at the state and local level to get to know Lebanon. So any way you can think of helping us in terms of our congressional delegation trips as well, we're open to.
Let me just personalize this one more time for you all. Personalize it from my point of view. I'm from Peoria, Illinois. My grandparents came to Peoria in 1895 through Ellis Island. And when they came, there were no Lebanese people in Peoria, I can tell you that. They came from a village called I-2. Now there are 5,000 Lebanese Americans, almost all from I-2. More from I-2 in Peoria than from I-2, the little village. And you know what we did? We invited Michelle Moab to come to our community because, you know why? He was running for parliament to represent I-2 in Lebanon. He came to Peoria. He campaigned in Peoria. He got some votes in Peoria. So if you want to know the tricks of the trade, if you want to get involved in politics, do what we did. Michelle, thank you for coming to Peoria.
Let me, I'm going to ask 1 or 2 questions to kick this off and then maybe get a few from the audience. I'm going to start with our congressional members. Talk to us about the importance of the U.S.-Lebanon Friendship Caucus, which now has 24 members in Congress. Why is that important in terms of policy making? Where does a caucus like that fit in? And secondly, and you guys can decide among yourselves between you how to handle this. These guys are elected not to represent Lebanon, not even to represent Lebanese Americans per se. So, although we think otherwise sometimes, rather they're representing the constituents of their district. So how then do we get your attention when we go to Washington about Lebanon? What are the tricks involved in trying to present a case on Lebanon that may be secondary to your constituents' interests? Those 2 questions.
Well, the Lebanese American Friendship Caucus, comprised of members of Congress of both sides of the aisle, and usually co-chaired by a Democrat and a Republican, is very important when it comes to policy making in the Congress of the United States. This is a group, again, nonpartisan members that have as their number 1 goal what is in the best interest of the United States of America in this part of the world. And yes, they're looking out for Lebanon's best interests as well. But that's what you have to remember, and this gets into the second question as well, that members of Congress are not elected to represent Lebanon. That's true. They're elected to represent their constituents and America's best interests. You have to always look at it in that perspective and describe it in that manner, that you're advocating what is in America's best interest, and helping Lebanon is in America's best interest for the very reasons that Paul and Bilal mentioned in their opening comments. Those reasons they ticked off: fighting ISIS, keeping a calm in the middle of a raging storm in that part of the world, dispelling the misperceptions that exist about Lebanon. All of this is in America's best interest as well, probably foremost. And so that's what I think you have to keep in mind when you approach your member of Congress and or U.S. Senator, and also recognize, I'm getting both questions together now, but also recognize the importance of the Lebanese American Caucus. Urge your member of Congress to join that caucus when he or she is back home and open office hours, or just office hours, or town hall meetings, or whatever format. It should not be hard, as Ray mentioned, to reach your member of Congress, because if it is difficult, then he or she has no reason to be representing you, and you remind them of that the next election if you have trouble seeing him or her. Because members of the House are the closest federally elected officials to the American people. Nobody gets appointed to the U.S. House of Representatives. If there's a vacancy for any reason, there's a special election held, not an appointment by the governor like in the Senate. So remember that.
Thank you.
Well, let me just cap off what Nick started by saying that Nick started the bipartisan Lebanese Friendship Caucus 38 years ago or 40 years ago when he was elected, because he knew the value of both Republicans. So Nick deserves a lot of credit for what he did. And as soon as I was elected in 1994, I obviously joined. And let me tell you how effective we've been. You've already heard it from Ed Gabriel in the numbers that were just announced. And Jay, thank you for all the work that you do. But those numbers are a result of the Lebanese caucus going to the appropriators and others in the House and saying to them, this is what is needed. These are the priorities. When I first was elected in 94, my first trip to Lebanon was in 95. There was a travel ban. Nick and I went together. We came back, he is a Democrat, me as a Republican, him from West Virginia, me from Illinois. We went right to President Clinton and we said, it is nonsense for there to be a travel ban against Lebanon, and we laid out why. And you know what impressed President Clinton? The fact it was bipartisan. It was a Democrat and a Republican. And we had the ammunition because we had been to the country. We had talked to the leaders. We had talked to the president and the prime minister and the speakers and the members of parliament. And we knew clearly that there was no danger for Americans to be traveling in Lebanon. And we made that point. And my proudest accomplishment as a member of the Lebanese Friendship Caucus is the fact that Nick and I and others that were members of it back then got the travel ban lifted and really sent a message that Lebanon is a great place and a safe place to visit.
Bravo. Well, Nick and Ray have given us an assignment, all of you an assignment. Please get to know your member of Congress, your House member, and go to a meeting and ask them to join the U.S.-Lebanon Friendship Caucus. Please do that. If we can get this up to 100 members, which is doable with your help, it will be a very powerful group of people. So take that home as an assignment. Before we have to stop this panel, maybe we should ask if there are any questions from the audience, and then we can go back to Bilal and Paul if necessary. Yes?
Apo Jabarian from Los Angeles. I'm publisher of USA Armenian Life magazine. I want to thank for this illustrious panel for giving us insights into how we can make a difference as Lebanese Americans. My question is directed to Secretary Lahoud and Congressman Rahel. Like you talked about how some forces have almost succeeded in convincing the Clinton administration to place a travel ban on Lebanon. So nowadays, periodically, I'm sorry to report that we come across some articles against Lebanon, and you know, there are some forces within the neoconservative and neoliberal movement in the United States who would love to tarnish Lebanon's reputation. So as a concerned Lebanese American, what would be your advice to the Lebanese American community to counter the anti-Lebanon articles in the American media?
Well, I think that you can use your local media. The fact that you came here, the fact that you heard the minister's speech, the fact you heard the ambassador's speech gives you the ammunition to say that you've interfaced with the top leaders of Lebanon, the Minister of Foreign Affairs from Lebanon, the ambassador from Lebanon. And the point is, take what they have given you and go back home and dispel. It's not easy because there's a lot of social media, there's a lot of other media. You just have to keep working at it. But take the talks that they gave and the good information, and go back home, write letters to the editor, call your own representative, and say, hey, I just came from Washington, and this is what I heard. This is what's really going on in Lebanon. And it's a lot of hard work, and you have to keep after it.
Do you want to say anything?
Let me just add that you may or may not, like I sometimes do, suspect the real motives of these members that are saying anti-Lebanon and introducing anti-Lebanon measures because of their hidden agenda for somebody else, some other country in the region. But
who might that be?
I don't know. But let me tell you to approach these members of Congress with respect, whether you agree with what they're doing or not. If you see a member introducing something you think is not in Lebanon and the U.S.'s best interest, try to make an appointment with him or her. Again, be respectful, but go in with the facts to show you disagree with them on the issue.
Let me add to this. Think about being able to say to people, please don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. This is a big issue. It's a complicated issue. It's not black and white. It's bigger than Lebanon. It's regional. And if you expect us, a small country of Lebanon, to fix this problem when America, Russia, Iran, the Gulf countries, Israel, and everybody else is fighting their war in and around us, it's foolish. So widen this discussion. And also, if you really want to solve Lebanon's problem, strengthen it. Strengthen the LAF. Double the budget of the LAF. Let them become the protector of this country.
Let me just, one other suggestion. I think you should make sure you get the information from Paul and his organization. They put out a lot of good information, and it's all authentic, and it's all backed up with facts. And if you can go online, or if you can personally talk to Paul, I think he can give you some good information that you can use also.
I would add to that they think through American eyes, which is important. American eyes are important to present to Congress. We've got to think like Americans. We've got to think about what's in America's interest if we're going to convince policymakers who represent America to understand what you're about. So that's the added value also of what MEI, under the leadership of Paul Salem and his cohorts, including Bilal Saab, are doing. There's a question back here. Sir, yes.
Just on this point, my name is Dan. I'm from Canada. And on this point about looking through American eyes or Canadian eyes, and we've talked a lot about the stability and the security of Lebanon militarily. But how about through American and North American eyes, which is the biggest issue we're all facing, is how to grow our economies and how to leverage this new technological, the modern world and the opportunities it provides, and connect that to Lebanon's greatest and most notorious and famous asset, which is its people and its youth and its ideas that can be harnessed to power growth, both here in places like Silicon Valley or in Toronto or Waterloo, for the benefit of North America and the benefit of Lebanon. And how do we change the message and reprioritize that, where we can make this greater shared prosperity and play to our real strength in Lebanon, the vision for the future?
Yeah, thank you for raising that issue, because we've been talking a lot about politics and about security and military-to-military relations. But as I did mention, the issue of shared values and the issues of the business community and the history of relations between Lebanon and the U.S. at that level. And when you emphasize business interests and business relations as well as person-to-person relations, you get away from some of the tight security and political arguments that take place in Washington, D.C. And I think at that score, there's work to be done on both sides. There are excellent business delegations that come from Lebanon to the United States. They play a very important role, not only visiting Washington, but New York, Chicago, Houston, LA, Silicon Valley. I think we should do much more of that from the business community in Lebanon, with coordination with our government and the embassy. And secondly, as you said, our resources are people. And this is where our higher education institutions are exceptionally important. Lebanon, like the US, prides itself on its institutions of higher education. Many of us have studied in US institutions of higher education, and universities like the Lebanese American University, and Jay Gazelle is here from that university, or the American University of Beirut are the engines for Lebanon, and they are naturally linked to the United States. So highlighting our business leadership and our higher education leadership would help achieve those goals. I think also it's up to our government to institute some very important governance reforms, corruption reforms, and economic reforms. We are not growing anything like we should be growing. We should have been more like Dubai and the others and so on. Sadly, we're lagging very far behind. Many American businessmen would love to invest in Lebanon in so many sectors, not only the traditional sectors of trade and tourism, things of that nature, but high-tech sectors because of the high value that our human capital has. But we do need better reforms, more governance on our end, and I think that will grab the attention of not only American business, but American government as well.
Let me just say one more.
And Ray,
let me just say one word about this. There's a very strong group in Lebanon called AmCham. It's a very, very good organization. And they bring a delegation every year, and they coordinate it through the ambassador. What I suggest for you is when that group comes, hopefully the ambassador's office can alert you to that, and somehow there can be a connection. AmCham is all about creating opportunities for Lebanese businesses and vice versa, and the talent that's in the country. So it's a very good organization.
thank you, Ray. Let me just say something about the current economy in Lebanon. The governor of the central bank is known as the Houdini of Lebanon. What he's done to hold the country together during some of these most difficult times is nothing short of amazing. That now gives time for the government to enact fiscal policies, as Paul said. That small country of Lebanon has been offered $11 billion in infrastructure money to help with their fiscal policy moving forward. And if they can, in short order, take the necessary steps to have government reforms and transparency reforms, this country is going to really be on a fast track in a short period of time. It puts a lot of pressure on the foreign ministry, on all the current government under Prime Minister Hariri, but they seem to be pulling together. So we've got to really help them in the next year. The next year is crucial. There's a question back here. I don't know when we have to stop. If somebody will give me the high side. Yes, ma'am.
I'm Dr. Alcara from Los Angeles. I know Secretary LaHood and a few of the other gentlemen on the council. I have two concerns. First of all, to give you a little background, my grandfather came here in 1890. We're several generations Lebanese. I've been involved in Lebanese organizations for many years. Nothing seems to go anywhere. The issue for me is, number one, an extreme reach out to our youth. This is a priority. I have two sons. One's a PhD, computer science, UCLA. Great kid, does a lot of drone work, etc. I said to him, go to Lebanon. Mom, nothing there for me. My other son's a Berkeley graduate, computer engineer. Nothing there for me. I understand you're throwing billions of dollars towards Lebanon. The problem is, what does Lebanon have to offer our children? There will be a day, none of you will be around, neither will I, and these children are lost. You have a serious problem here. It's not just what Lebanon needs from us, it's what Lebanon must do for the generation to come. That's number one. Number two, if you don't mind, gentlemen, I hear a lot of money being thrown around, a lot of dollars, and I think it's great. But when Americans go to Lebanon and they have issues to deal with family, properties, et cetera, they're finding a very difficult challenge in dealing with their problems. What we need to do is facilitate that return. And I implore all of you, I love it that you're all here. I notice that a lot of people are recent immigrants and they have a passion, and I love their passion, but we're really losing the core of what's happening. And thank you.
Thank you very much for those comments. Let me just say, I'm glad you brought this up. ATFL is starting a youth group for anyone under 40. So please direct your children, your twins, your triplets to ATFL if they're interested in getting involved. We'd really like to start a volunteer program with the youth. We can take one last question and we're going to cut it off. Yes, sir.
Thank you. So we talk about all the great things the U.S. administration has done for Lebanon. Thank you very much. It's important. I mean, the military side, it's very much appreciated. Probably more is needed because really what you give is probably pennies on the dollar relative to what Israel receives. And even if you believe Hezbollah is the enemy, Hezbollah also believes it receives a lot of money from Iran. But anyway, that's not my question. My question is, if you really want to help Lebanese people, Lebanese American, Lebanese or Lebanese American, okay? We need direct flights. We need direct flights from the U.S. to Lebanon. Okay?
I'll let Ray handle that one.
You want that
I
one?
tell you.
No, let him.
And especially Secretary Lahoud, as you know, your past job. No, I know. Okay. but
Okay,
here
I'm going to answer your
no,
question.
but I
Art.
know,
If that's your question, I'm happy to answer it.
We feel like second-class citizens when we have to connect to Europe.
We don't need any lectures. I get your question, and I'm going to answer it very directly. When I was in Congress, Adib Kassis, my very, very dear friend, who runs Middle East Airlines in New York, came to me. I was on the Transportation Committee, and asked me if it was possible. Nick was on the Transportation Committee. We worked together to see if we could find a way to get direct flights. When I was Secretary of Transportation, Adib came back to me, and here's the issue. The Department of Homeland Security will not allow direct flights from Beirut to the United States as long as Hezbollah is involved with the airport.
Period.
Now, look at. We're not going to debate that. That is the reason there are no direct flights.
Whether we like it or not.
He and I have fought for that. We've tried to make the case for it, the same way we made the case for lifting the travel ban. But as long as the Department of Homeland Security has the jurisdiction of deciding, it's not the Department of Transportation, and they've decided that as long as Hezbollah has the influence they have at the airport, there will be no direct flights. That's the end of the story.
And on that note, let me just say, you have just heard from, I think, the four most important experts on U.S.-Lebanon relations in this city. So let's give them a big round of applause and thank you all.
Thank you all.